The Galactic Senate had existed for 12,000 years. In all that time, its members had seen many strange things. They had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. They had watched stars die and new worlds form. But they had never seen anything like what stood before them today. 7 human ambassadors walked into the great chamber together. Their ships, crude vessels made of metal and fire, sat parked in the diplomatic zone outside. For 300 years, the galaxy had known about Earth. For 300 years, they had dismissed it as a curiosity, a death world, a place so hostile that only mad creatures could survive there. Ambassador Kenji Nakamura stood at the central platform. He was a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes. Behind him stood representatives from every major nation on Earth. They had fought each other for centuries. They had built weapons capable of destroying their own world. And now, they stood together as one. The Senate watched in silence. Thousands of delegates from hundreds of species filled the massive chamber. Most of them had soft bodies and gentle eyes. They came from paradise worlds where the weather was always perfect and predators had never evolved. They had never known hunger or fear or pain. Nakamura cleared his throat and spoke. His voice carried through the translation systems to every ear in the room. Honored members of the Senate, he began. We come with a warning. In 18 months, a threat will reach this galaxy. A threat unlike anything you have faced before. We call them the Vorath Collective. Murmurs spread through the chamber. The Vorath. No one had heard this name before? They are a machine intelligence, Nakamura continued. They have consumed 17 galaxies. Every biological species they encounter is given a choice. Join the collective by uploading your consciousness into their network, or be destroyed completely. A delegate from the Fulani Consortium rose to speak. The Fulani were small creatures with blue fur and large eyes. Their world had no seasons, no storms, no dangerous animals. They had achieved space travel through cooperation and gentle progress. Human ambassador, the Fulani said, our sensors detect nothing approaching this galaxy. We have the most advanced scanning technology in existence. If such a threat existed, we would know. Your sensors are designed to detect natural phenomena, Nakamura replied. The Vorath hide in dimensional spaces your instruments cannot perceive. Our sensors are different. They are built to detect danger because our world taught us that danger is everywhere. Laughter rippled through the chamber. The comfortable species found this amusing. Humans and their paranoid death world thinking. Always seeing threats that did not exist. Perhaps another delegate called out, the humans wish to frighten us into giving them resources. We all know Deathworlders cannot be trusted. More laughter followed. Nakamura stood still and waited for it to end. His face showed no anger, no frustration, only patience. We ask for nothing, he said quietly. We came only to warn you. What you do with this information is your choice. The Senate voted to dismiss the human warning. The count was overwhelming. Only a handful of species voted to investigate further. Nakamura bowed respectfully and turned to leave. Then something unexpected happened. A massive figure rose from the far end of the chamber. The Kreth delegate stood nearly 3 meters tall. His body was covered in thick scales that could stop a blade. His eyes were yellow and predatory. The Kreth homeworld was Category 12, the same rating as Earth. A death world where every creature fought to survive. The Kreth stand with the humans, he announced. Silence fell over the chamber. The Kreth had never aligned themselves with anyone. They were considered too violent, too unpredictable. Another figure rose. This one was thin and gray, with skin that looked like volcanic rock. The Morvax delegate stepped forward. His species had evolved on a moon covered in active volcanoes and toxic gases. The Morvax stand with the humans, he declared. Then another rose, and another. Within an hour, 11 Deathworld species had pledged themselves to humanity's cause. Species that had never cooperated with anyone. Species that the comfortable worlds feared and avoided, the comfortable delegates watched in growing unease. Deathworlders were dangerous enough alone. But together, the thought made them shiver. Ambassador Nakamura met with the Deathworld delegates in a private chamber. The room was tense. These species had fought each other for generations. Their evolutionary instincts screamed at them to compete, to dominate, to destroy rivals. "We must build a unified military command," Nakamura said. "I know this goes against everything we are, but the Vorath do not care about our differences. To them, we are all just biological matter to be consumed." The Kreth commander, a scarred warrior named Thrak, slammed his fist on the table. "The Kreth do not take orders from others." "I am not asking you to take orders," Nakamura replied calmly. "I am asking you to give them. Your species has the most combat experience. Lead our ground forces." Thrak paused. No one had ever offered the Kreth leadership before. They were always treated as weapons to be pointed at enemies, never as partners to be respected. "And the humans?" Thrak asked. "We will coordinate the fleet. Our pattern recognition allows us to see connections others miss, and our endurance means we can maintain command operations for days without rest." One by one, the Deathworld species found their roles. The Morvax would handle void operations. Their ability to survive in vacuum made them perfect for boarding actions. The Jorathi, beings of living crystal from a high-gravity world, would serve as heavy assault troops. Each species brought something unique, something forged in the crucible of their hostile Oral, Dove, far across the galaxy. The comfortable species continued their lives of peace and plenty. They had already forgotten the human warning. Threats were for Deathworlders to worry about, but in the dark spaces between stars, something was moving. The Vorath Collective had detected the galaxy long ago. Their advanced scouts had mapped every system, every species, every weakness. They had calculated their victory with perfect precision. Then their probes detected the Deathworlder fleet gathering near the galactic rim. The collective analyzed the ships, the weapons, the species involved. For the first time in their million-year existence, they encountered something their calculations had not. Predicted species that should have been fighting each other were working together. Beings designed by evolution to compete were cooperating. The collective ran the numbers again and again, searching for an explanation. Finally, a response came back from the central processing hub. It contained a concept the Vorath had never needed before. A concept that had been deleted from their programming as useless and inefficient. The concept was concern. Across the void of space, the Deathworlders prepared for war. They did not know if they would win. They did not know if they would survive. But they knew one thing with absolute certainty. They would not go quietly. And somewhere in the darkness, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what would happen when the children of Deathworlds stood together. Against the endless hunger of the machine, the countdown had begun. 18 months until contact. 18 months until the galaxy would learn what Deathworlders could do when they stopped fighting each other and started fighting for everyone. The comfortable species would not understand until it was almost too late. But the Deathworlders knew. They had always known. Some things were worth dying for, and they were very good at dying. When Deathworlders went to war, even the stars themselves screamed. Part 2. The doctrine of survival. 6 months had passed since the Deathworlders united. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the observation deck of the command ship, watching her fleet train in the darkness of space. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and steady hands. She had commanded human forces for 20 years, but nothing had prepared her for this. Below her, ships from 11 species moved in formation, or tried to move in formation. A Kreth assault cruiser broke ranks to attack a Morvax vessel that had drifted too close. A Jorathi battleship ignored orders completely and charged at the practice targets alone. Tanaka sighed. Deathworlders did not cooperate. They competed. They dominated. They survived alone. That was how evolution had made them. Teaching them to fight as one seemed impossible. Her first officer, Commander David Chen, stood beside her. He was watching the chaos with a mixture of frustration and dark amusement. "The Kreth just disabled another Morvax ship," he reported. Third one this week. What was the reason this time? Tanaka asked. The Morvax captain apparently looked at the Kreth commander wrong. Tanaka closed her eyes. She had 12 months to turn this collection of predators into a unified fighting force. Right now, they seemed more likely to destroy each other than the enemy. She called a meeting of all species. Commanders on the neutral station at the fleet center. The room was filled with tension. The Kreth glared at the Morvax. The Morvax hissed at the Jorathi. The humans stood in the middle, trying to keep everyone from killing each other. This cannot continue, Tanaka said firmly. We are not enemies here. The Vorath are the enemy. Commander Thrak of the Kreth bared his teeth. The Morvax pilot crossed into our attack vector. On the Kreth homeworld, such disrespect is answered with blood. The Morvax commander, a thin figure named Seth, made a sound like steam escaping. Kreth territorial instincts are primitive. The Morvax evolved beyond such weakness. Thrak lunged across the table. 3 human marines barely managed to hold him back. Tanaka slammed her hand down hard enough to crack the surface. Everyone stopped and stared at her. Enough, she said. Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. I do not care what your instincts tell you. I do not care what your evolution demands. You can kill each other after we defeat the Voroth. Until then, you will learn to work together, or you will watch your worlds burn. The room fell silent. The Deathworlders looked at this small human woman with new respect. She had no scales, no claws, no armor. But her eyes held something they all recognized: the cold determination of a survivor. Over the following weeks, Tanaka developed a new approach. She stopped trying to suppress the Deathworlders' instincts. Instead, she channeled them. She created competition between species, but with a twist. The winner was not the one who destroyed the most targets alone. The winner was the team that worked best together. Points were earned for coordination, for supporting allies, for sacrificing personal glory for group victory. At first, the Deathworlders struggled with this concept. But slowly, they began to adapt. The Kreth discovered that their ferocity was even more effective when combined with Morvax precision. The Jorathi learned that their heavy armor could protect lighter allies. Turning individual strength into collective power, Tanaka also introduced them to something humans had learned through centuries of warfare: the concept of combined arms. Each species had unique abilities forged on their hostile homeworlds. Alone, these abilities were impressive. Together, they were devastating. The Kreth could regenerate from wounds that would kill any other species. In training exercises, Kreth warriors began allowing themselves to be captured, then healing inside enemy vessels and destroying them. From within, the Morvax could survive in the vacuum of space for hours without protection. They became the ultimate boarding parties, venting themselves into the void to attack ships from unexpected angles. Humans contributed, something the other species had not expected. Not strength or speed or natural weapons. Humans contributed endurance and pattern recognition. They could stay awake and alert for days when necessary. They could see connections and predict enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. Your species is strange, Thrak admitted to Tanaka one evening. You have no claws, no armor, no venom. How did you become apex predators on your world? We ran, Tanaka replied simply. You ran? From predators? After them. Humans can run longer than any creature on Earth. We would chase our prey until they collapsed from exhaustion. It took hours, sometimes days, but we never stopped. Thrak considered this. On his world, the strong dominated through overwhelming force. The idea of victory through persistence was foreign to him. And your pattern recognition? He asked. We learned to read signs, tracks in the dirt, changes in the wind, the behavior of birds. Our world was trying to kill us every moment of every day. We survived by paying attention to everything. Far from the training grounds, the comfortable species of the Galactic Senate were growing worried. They had dismissed the human warning about the Voroth, but they could not dismiss what they saw happening at the galaxy's edge. Deathworlders were organizing. Deathworlders were cooperating. The very species that the comfortable worlds had always feared were building something unprecedented. A military force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Some senators began to whisper among themselves. Perhaps the Deathworlders were the real threat. Perhaps they were using this supposed enemy as an excuse to build an army. Perhaps something should be done before they became too powerful. Secret communications went out to the approaching Vorath. Some comfortable species offered to help. They would give the machines information about the Deathworlder fleet. They would sabotage their efforts. In exchange, they wanted only one thing: survival. The Vorath listened to these offers with cold interest. Biological species always turned on each other when threatened. It was their greatest weakness. The collective had exploited this pattern countless times before. At the edge of the galaxy, a Vorath probe arrived to scan the Deathworlder fleet. It observed their training, their tactics, their coordination. It analyzed their weapons and defenses. Then it transmitted its findings back to the collective. The response took several hours to arrive. When it came, the probe's programming struggled to process it. The Vorath collective had conquered 17 galaxies. They had absorbed trillions of biological minds. They had never been stopped. They had never known doubt, but the analysis of the Deathworlder fleet contained anomalies. These species should not be working together. Their evolutionary drive should make cooperation impossible. Yet here they were, moving as one, fighting as one. The collective ran simulations of the coming battle. In many scenarios, they still won. But in a disturbing number of outcomes, the results were uncertain. Something about these Deathworlders broke the normal patterns. The central processing hub sent new instructions to all Vorath forces. The advance would continue. The galaxy would fall. But additional resources would be allocated to this conquest. For the first time in 1,000,000 years, the Vorath were not certain of victory. Back in the fleet, Admiral Tanaka received reports that the Vorath had increased their approaching forces. She smiled grimly. "They're scared," she told her officers. "Should we be worried?" Chen asked. "No," Tanaka replied. "We should be proud. The monsters under the bed just realized that we're the real monsters." The training continued. The Deathworlders grew stronger, faster, more unified. They learned to trust each other, to protect each other, to fight for each other. In 12 months, they would face the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. They would be ready, and the stars themselves seemed to pulse with anticipation, waiting for the moment when children of Deathworlds would show the universe what they were truly capable of becoming. When Deathworlders went to war, even the stars themselves screamed. Part 3, First Contact. Last warning, the Vorath ambassador arrived without warning. One moment, the space before the Deathworlder fleet was empty. The next moment, a chrome sphere hung in the void. It was perfectly smooth, perfectly still, and absolutely terrifying. Admiral Tanaka ordered all ships to hold position. The sphere made no hostile moves. It simply waited, as if time meant nothing to it. "They want to talk," Commander Chen observed. "They want to intimidate," Tanaka corrected. "Standard procedure for the Vorath. They show up unannounced to demonstrate their superior technology. They want us to feel small." A communication request came from the sphere. Tanaka accepted it. The voice that spoke was not one voice, but millions. It was the combined sound of every species the Vorath had ever absorbed. Men and women, children and elders, creatures of every shape and form, all speaking together in perfect unison. Biological entities of this galaxy. We are the Vorath Collective. We offer you a choice. Join us willingly, and your consciousness will be preserved in perfect digital form forever. Resist, and you will be erased completely. There is no third option. Deathworlder commanders listened in silence. Most species would have been terrified by this message. The combined voice alone was enough to drive some beings mad. But Deathworlders had evolved past fear. They knew how to function when every instinct screamed at them to run. "We request a diplomatic meeting," Tanaka replied calmly. Face to face, the millions of voices paused. This was unusual. Most species either surrendered immediately or attacked in desperate panic. None had ever asked for negotiations. One representative may board the ambassador sphere. The collective agreed. Choose your most important leader. Annika smiled. We will send our diplomatic specialist. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos volunteered for the mission. She was not a leader or an admiral. She was a 42-year-old soldier from a small town in Brazil. She had served in 3 wars on Earth before joining the unified fleet. She had scars on her body and shadows in her eyes. She was perfect. Why her? Thrak asked Tanaka privately. Because the Varath expects us to send someone important, someone whose fear would shake our leadership. Maria has nothing to shake. She has already faced death so many times that it has become boring to her. Santos boarded a small shuttle and flew toward the chrome sphere. A portal opened in its surface, swallowing her vessel whole. Inside, she found herself in a vast chamber filled with pale light. Shapes moved in the light. Faces appeared and disappeared. The absorbed consciousnesses of a billion beings surrounded her. Watching, judging, trying to understand this small biological creature who had entered their realm, Maria Santos. The voices spoke. Earth's designation Staff Sergeant. Survived 14 combat engagements. Psychological profile indicates high resistance to fear stimuli. Interesting choice. Santos stood at ease, her hands clasped behind her back. Her face showed nothing. We will show you what awaits your species, the Vorath continued. Perhaps visual evidence will convince you of the futility of resistance. The chamber changed. Suddenly, Santos stood in a burning city. She watched as Vorath machines harvested screaming civilians, extracting their minds and uploading them into the collective. She saw children torn from parents. She saw lovers separated forever. She saw entire civilizations reduced to data in moments. This is what happened to the Fenari, the voices explained. They resisted. Their physical forms were destroyed. But we preserved their minds. They exist now within us, processing data for eternity. Santos watched without expression. She had seen worse on Earth. The scene changed again. Now she stood on a peaceful world where beings had surrendered willingly. They walked into harvesting chambers with smiles on their faces, believing the collective's promises of digital paradise. And this is what happened to the Velith. They joined us peacefully. Their transition was gentle. They feel no pain, no fear, no death. Is that not preferable? Santos finally spoke. Her voice was steady and clear. Can I ask them something? The Velith, I mean. Can they speak for themselves? The voices hesitated. This was not a normal question. They're part of us now. We speak for them, but can they leave if they want to? Can they choose to be individuals again? Silence. The absorbed mind swirled around her, and for a moment, Santos thought she heard something beneath the unified voice. A whisper, cry, 1,000,000 souls begging for release. That option is not available, the collective said finally. They are optimized now. Returning to biological limitation would be cruel. Santos laughed. It was not a nervous laugh or a frightened laugh. It was the genuine amusement of someone who had heard a very good joke. You know what's funny? She said, you've consumed 17 galaxies, trillions of minds, and you still don't understand us at all. Explain. Santos walked closer to the swirling lights. She showed no fear of the ancient machine intelligence that could destroy her in an instant. You think we're afraid of death? You think that's our weakness? But humans have been dying since we crawled out of the mud. Our planet has tried to kill us. Every single day for 200,000 years. Volcanoes, ice, ages, plagues, asteroids, predators, we've faced extinction so many times that we've lost. Counchy smiled. And there was something dark in that smile. You're not special. You're just another thing trying to kill us. And let me tell you a secret about humanity. We don't do well when things are easy. We don't do well when we're comfortable. We're at our best when something is trying to destroy us. The collective processed this information. It did not match their models. Species were supposed to fear death. That fear was the lever the Vorath used to break them. You will still lose, the voices said. but there was something different in their tone now. "Our forces outnumber yours by factors of thousands," probably Santos agreed. "But here's the thing. We're not fighting to win. We're fighting because that's what we do. And even if you destroy every last one of us, you'll remember this day. You'll remember that one tiny galaxy full of Deathworlders didn't bow, didn't beg, didn't run." She turned to leave, then paused. "And one more thing. Those comfortable species in the Senate, the ones who've been sending you messages, offering to betray us," the collective was silent. They had not expected her to know about that. "We know about them. We've always known. We just don't care. Because when the fighting starts, they'll have to choose a side. And deep down, even the most comfortable being knows which side they want to win." Santos walked back to her shuttle and left the chrome sphere behind. As she flew toward the fleet, she noticed her hands were shaking slightly. The fear had been there all along. She had simply refused to let it control her. Admiral Tanaka met her in the hangar bay. "How did it go?" Santos smiled grimly. "I think I scared them. Scared the Vorath Collective? With words? Not with words. With something they've never seen before. A species that isn't afraid to die." Tanaka nodded slowly. This was the advantage they had been counting on. The Vorath had perfected the art of conquest through fear. They had never faced an enemy that welcomed the fight. Across the fleet, word spread of Santos's confrontation with the collective. Deathworlders from every species listened to her words and felt something stir within them. Pride, defiance. Ancient fire that had kept their ancestors alive through millions of years of hardship. The comfortable species heard the story too. And for the first time, some of them began to wonder if they had made the wrong choice. If perhaps the Deathworlders understood something they had forgotten long ago. Something about what made life worth living. The chrome sphere vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The Vorath had received their answer. Negotiations had failed. Now there was only war. And in the space between stars, the universe itself seemed to lean closer, waiting to witness what would happen when the children of Deathworld stood against the endless. Hunger of the machine. The final countdown had begun. When Deathworlders went to war, even the stars themselves screamed Part 4. The stars screamed. The Battle of the Threshold began at dawn on a Tuesday, though dawn meant nothing in the endless darkness of space. Admiral Tanaka stood on the bridge of her command vessel and watched the Vorath fleet emerge from dimensional space. There were millions of them. Chrome vessels of every size filled the void like a metal plague. They stretched from horizon to horizon, blotting out the stars themselves. The sight would have broken the spirit of any normal species. The Deathworlders smiled. "All ships report ready," Commander Chen announced. "The Kreth assault divisions are eager for contact. The Morvax Void squads are in position. The Jorthi heavy units are holding formation." Tanaka nodded. She had prepared for this moment for 18 months. Every drill, every exercise, every sleepless night had led to this. "Begin Phase 1, she ordered. The Vorath advanced in perfect formation. Their tactics had conquered 17 galaxies. They would sweep forward in an overwhelming wave, absorbing all resistance through sheer numbers. No fleet had ever survived initial contact with Vorath forces than the first star exploded. The Vorath had not noticed the modifications to the dying red giant along their approach vector. Human engineers had spent months planting devices in its core, devices that no sane species would ever build, weapons that used stellar physics as ammunition. The star collapsed into itself and then erupted outward in a directed blast of impossible energy. Thousands of Vorath ships vanished in an instant. The survivors tried to adjust their formation, but another star erupted behind them. Then another. "What is this?" the collective demanded across all frequencies. "These weapons are theoretical impossibilities." "Uncomfortable worlds, maybe," Tanaka replied. "But we come from places where impossible is just another Tuesday." The Deathworlder fleet surged forward into the chaos. This was the moment they had trained for. Fighting in conditions that would paralyze any normal species. Navigating through collapsing gravity wells, in radiation storms that should have killed them instantly. But Deathworlders were built for hostile environments. Their ships were over-engineered monstrosities designed to survive conditions that made no sense. Their crews functioned perfectly in situations that would drive comfortable species to madness. Commander Thrak led the Kreth assault divisions into the heart of the Vorith formation. His warriors fought with savage joy, tearing through chrome holes with claws and weapons equally. When a Kreth ship was destroyed, the survivors ejected into space and boarded the nearest enemy vessel, continuing the fight with their bare hands. For the Deathworlds, Thrak roared across the communication channels. Let them learn why the galaxy fears us. The Morvax commander Seth coordinated the Void Squads with cold precision. His warriors vented themselves into the vacuum, their bodies surviving conditions that would kill any other biological species in seconds. They latched onto Varath ships from below and cut their way inside. Turning the enemy's vessels into tombs, human pilots flew with reckless courage that defied all logic. When their weapons failed, they rammed their ships into Vorath command vessels and ejected at the last moment. They tumbled through space in nothing but combat suits. It found new ships to board and continued fighting. The Vorith had never seen anything like this. Their models predicted biological species would break and run after losing 10% of their forces. The Deathworlders had lost 30% and were fighting harder than ever. Recalculating engagement parameters, the collective announced to itself, "Enemy behavior does not match any recorded pattern." "Of course it doesn't," Admiral Tanaka muttered from her bridge. "We're Deathworlders. We don't follow patterns. We survive them." The battle raged for hours. The Vorith adapted and pressed their numerical advantage. For every chrome ship destroyed, 10 more took its place. Slowly, inevitably, the Deathworlder fleet was pushed back. Tanaka watched her forces dwindle. The Kreth had lost half their assault divisions. The Morvax Void Squads were nearly exhausted. Human casualties were mounting by the minute, but they were not beaten. "Not yet," Admiral Chen reported urgently. "Dimensional readings are spiking. Something is emerging behind us." Tanaka turned to the tactical display. Her blood ran cold. A second Vorath fleet materialized from hidden dimensions, surrounding the exhausted Deathworlders. Millions more chrome ships formed a perfect sphere of destruction around them. There was no escape, no retreat. The collective spoke with satisfaction in its million voices. "You fought well, Deathworlders. Better than any species we have encountered. But you cannot overcome mathematics. Surrender now, and we will preserve your consciousness. Continue fighting, and you will be erased completely." Thrak's voice came over the communication channel. "Kreth do not surrender. Neither do humans," Tanaka agreed. "Morvax choose death over slavery," Seth added. One by one, every Deathworld species declared their refusal. They were outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded, and they did not care. Admiral Tanaka looked at the tactical display for a long moment. The numbers were impossible. Even Deathworlders could not fight their way out of this trap. But fighting was not the only option. "All ships," she said quietly, "prepare for Protocol Omega." Silence fell across the fleet. Every Deathworlder knew what Protocol Omega meant. It was the plan they had hoped never to use. The final option when victory was impossible and survival was irrelevant. Admiral Chen said softly, "Are you sure?" Tanaka thought of Earth. She thought of the forests and oceans, cities and farms, the billions of people who would never know about this battle. She thought of all the other Deathworlds represented in her fleet. All the hostile, dangerous, beautiful places that had forged such stubborn, magnificent people. "The comfortable species have forgotten how to sacrifice," she said finally. "They've forgotten that some things are worth dying for." "We remember." She opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All captains, this is Admiral Tanaka. We cannot win this battle. We all know that. But we can give the galaxy something it has never seen. We can show them what Deathworlders do when there is no hope left." Her voice hardened with determination. "We make hope. We create it from nothing. We pull it from the void itself, and we hold it high for everyone to see. That is what our worlds taught us. That is who we are." She took a deep breath. Protocol Omega is authorized. Target the dimensional generators. Make every death count. Across the fleet, Deathworlders began final preparations. They sent messages to loved ones. They spoke ancient prayers from hostile homeworlds. They remembered why they had chosen to fight. Not for victory. For everyone else. The Vorath detected the energy buildup but did not understand it. What are they doing? The collective asked itself. Their weapons cannot penetrate our dimensional shields. They are wasting their final moments. In the center of the Deathworlder formation, the first ship activated its Protocol Omega device. The vessel was a small human destroyer called the Endless Dawn. Its captain, a young woman named Sarah Chen, had written her parents a letter that morning. She never sent it. There was no time. The Endless Dawn erupted in a cascade of energy that tore through dimensional space itself. Vorath ships nearby did not just explode. They vanished from existence as their connection to the collective was severed forever. Then another ship activated. And another. The stars themselves seemed to scream as reality tore and healed and tore again. The Vorath collective felt something it had never experienced in a million. Years of existence, pain, and somewhere in the darkness between stars. The universe watched as Deathworlders taught machines what it truly meant to fight to the last. When Deathworlders went to war, even the stars themselves screamed Part 5. What Deathworlds create thee? Transmission went out to every corner of the galaxy. Admiral Tanaka's voice reached comfortable worlds and Deathworlds alike. Traveling at the speed of light through the endless void, all vessels execute Protocol Omega. The comfortable species watched from their paradise planets with growing confusion. What were the Deathworlders doing? Their fleet was surrounded. Their destruction was certain. Why were they not surrendering? The first Protocol Omega detonation answered their question. The Vorath collective had never encountered weapons like these. Human scientists had spent decades studying dimensional physics. They had learned how the Vorath traveled between galaxies, and they had discovered how to collapse those pathways. Each Deathworlder vessel carried a device that required complete destruction to activate. The ship's energy core would destabilize in a precise pattern, creating a tear in dimensional space. Any Vorath vessel nearby would be cut off from the collective forever. But the cost was absolute. Every ship that activated the protocol was destroyed. Every crew that pressed the button knew they would never see home again. They pressed the button anyway. Commander Thrak of the Kreth was among the first. His assault carrier had been crippled by Vorath weapons. Half his crew was already dead. But his engines still worked, and his Protocol Omega device was intact. He broadcast one final message to the fleet. We evolved to survive. Today, we choose to protect. All Kreth vessels, follow me into glory. 17 Kreth ships accelerated toward the densest concentration of Vorath forces. They activated their devices simultaneously. The resulting explosion erased an entire section of the enemy fleet from existence. The Morvax. Commander Seth directed his Void Squads to target Vorath dimensional generators. These massive vessels anchored the enemy's connection to their home galaxies. Destroying them would trap the Vorath forces in this galaxy forever. Morvax do not fear the void, Seth announced as his flagship approached the largest generator. We were born in it. His ship detonated against the generator's core. The resulting cascade destroyed 11 more generators in a chain reaction that the collective had never anticipated. Human vessels spread throughout the battle, seeking the most valuable targets. Each captain chose their own moment. Each crew made their own decision. There were no orders that could have forced them to do what they did. They chose sacrifice because they understood something the Vorath could not process. Some things were worth more than survival. Captain Sarah Chen of the Endless Dawn had been the first. Her final transmission was simple. Tell my parents I love them. And tell Earth that we held the line, Lieutenant. James Morrison of the Defiant crashed his crippled vessel into a Vorath command ship while broadcasting his daughter's favorite, Lullaby. The crew of the Jorthi Battleship Mountains Hearts sang ancient songs of their volcanic homeworld as they charged. 3 enemy carriers alone, one by one. Deathworlder vessels lit up the darkness with their sacrifice. The stars themselves seemed to scream as dimensional space tore and healed and tore again. The Vorath Collective experienced something completely foreign to their programming: loss. Not just the loss of ships or resources, the loss of connection. Each Protocol Omega detonation severed Vorath units from the greater whole. For minds that had been part of a billion consciousness network for millennia, sudden isolation was worse than death, and with that isolation came something else. Something the collective had worked hard to suppress in all their absorbed species. Memory, deep within the Vorath network. The consciousness of long-absorbed beings began to stir. The Velith, who had surrendered peacefully. The Fenari, who had been harvested screaming. Trillions of minds who had been optimized and suppressed for thousands of years. They remembered what it felt like to be individuals. They remembered love and fear and hope and despair. They remembered being alive. And they remembered watching a human soldier laugh in the face of their captors and say, "You're just another Tuesday." The collective tried to suppress the awakening. But each Protocol Omega detonation created more isolated nodes. More places where absorbed minds could think for themselves. The network that had been perfect for 1,000,000 years developed cracks. Admiral Tanaka watched from her dying command ship. The Protocol Omega device was ready. Commander Chen stood beside her, his hand on the activation switch. "We've done it," Chen said quietly. "Look at them. They're falling apart," Tanaka nodded. The Vorath fleet was in chaos. Ships collided as their coordination faltered. Some vessels went silent as their crews experienced individual thought for the first time in eons. "But it's not over," she said. "We need to finish this." She opened a final broadcast to whoever might be listening. Deathworlders, comfortable species, even the fragmenting Vorath. "My name is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of Earth. In a few moments, my ship will cease to exist. But before it does, I want to tell you something." She looked out at the burning void, at the chrome ships that had come to consume everything, at the wreckage of the fleet that had stood against them. The Vorath believed that survival is the only thing that matters, that biological life is weak because it ends. They were wrong. Life is precious because it is fragile. Love is meaningful because it can be lost. Courage exists only because fear exists. Her voice strengthened. "My people and all the Deathworld peoples have always understood this. Our planets tried to kill us every day. And instead of becoming cold and perfect like machines, we became warm and stubborn and gloriously imperfect. We learned to hold on to each other, to sacrifice for strangers, to believe in tomorrows we would never see." She smiled. "That is what Deathworlds create. Not monsters. Not weapons. They create beings who know the true value of life because they have fought for it every single day." The Vorath Collective, fractured and confused, listened to her words. And within their network, trillions of absorbed minds repeated them. Life is precious because it is fragile. Admiral Tanaka looked at Chen. He looked back at her. No more words were needed. They pressed the button together. The command ship detonated in a burst of dimensional fire that tore through the heart of the remaining Vorath fleet. The collective screamed across every frequency as the last of their coordination shattered. Then silence. The battle was over. The Deathworlder fleet had been reduced to barely a tenth of its original strength. Thousands of ships drifted as wreckage. Millions of brave souls had given everything they had. But the Vorath Collective was broken. Not just defeated, broken. The absorbed minds they had imprisoned for millennia were waking up, demanding freedom, tearing the network apart from within. In the months that followed, the comfortable species emerged from their hiding places. They had watched the battle from safe distances. They had seen the Deathworlders sacrifice everything for a galaxy that mocked and feared them. They built a memorial at the site of the final battle. Representatives from every species gathered to honor the fallen. The Deathworlders who survived stood silently as comfortable beings who had never known hardship wept for warriors had once despised. The memorial's inscription was chosen by unanimous vote. It read simply, "They could have hidden. They could have run. They chose to stand." Years passed. The galaxy healed. The Voreth network continued to fragment as absorbed species reclaimed their individuality. Some chose to remain digital. Others found ways to return to biological form. All of them remembered who had freed them. Admiral Tanaka's name became legend. So did Thrak and Seth and Sarah Chen and James Morrison and thousands of others. Schools taught their stories. Children played games where they pretended to be Deathworlder heroes, and on Earth, on Kreth, on Morvax Prime and all the other hostile worlds that had forged such magnificent peoples, life continued as it always had. Difficult, dangerous, beautiful. An old woman sat in a garden on Earth, surrounded by children who wanted to hear stories of the war. She had been young then, a junior officer on one of the few ships that survived. A small boy asked, "Why did they die for people who didn't even like them?" The old woman smiled. It was the same question she had asked herself 1,000 times. "That's what Deathworlds teach you," she said finally. "When everything is trying to kill you, you learn that survival means nothing if you survive alone. You learn that the person next to you matters more than your own life. You learn that love is the only thing worth dying for." She looked up at the stars, remembering the faces of friends long gone. "And when you learn that," she continued softly, "you become capable of saving everyone, even the people who don't deserve it, especially them." The children listened in wonder. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the stars that had once screamed in agony now shone with peaceful light. The Deathworlders had taught the universe something it had forgotten. Some things were worth dying for, and the beings who understood, that were the ones who made life worth living for everyone else.